You found us. I'm so glad you did, but I am sorry that you had to. Who are we? I'll tell you what we're not. We're not old, we're not boring, and we're not giving up. So come on into our Widow Circle where trauma meets humor, and we remind you that you can not only survive, but thrive. This is Every Widow Thing.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Every Widow Thing. We have an exciting show planned for you today. I'm Kiera, and I'm here with Holly and Whitney. And Lacey couldn't be with us, but we have a guest that I'm super excited to introduce to you. I met Dana and her husband, Robert, at the back-to-school night, and they very kindly invited me to dinner afterwards with some other couples at a local restaurant, Clark's, here in Austin, that we all love.
Yeah.
And so, of course, when I show up and it's all couples and it's just me, everyone's kind of wondering, where's your partner? Where's Keira's dad? And after, I hope, a glass or two of Sancerre, I ended up telling, I couldn't remember if the wine had come yet or not, but I just kind of dove right in and told everybody my story and my situation. And
Which I'm sure brought the mood, just lifted that mood up in there.
It's so fun going
Made everybody
to a new
feel jolly.
school or a new job or a new neighborhood or whatever it is. I feel like, I've gotten better at just ripping the Band-Aid off now and just kind of coming right out and saying, this is the story. And I'll never forget at the end of the dinner, I'm walking back to my car. Everyone was lovely, by the way. And Dana and Robert came up to me specifically, and they just said, that they were so moved and that they were just here for me and for Keira and just wanted to support us in any way that they could at the new school. Mm. And that just made a world of difference for me kind of starting out that year. And then unfortunately, not like a few months after that, Robert became ill, and we'll let Dana talk about that a little bit.
I want to say, too, I remember that night so vividly. And when we left dinner, Robert and I talked about it the whole way home and even the next day. And I just remember telling him, I can't imagine.
Had you heard the story? Like, had you heard about it? Because it was something that a lot of people just heard about because it was so horrific.
They had, but I had not.
Mm-hmm.
So really, when we invited her, we just maybe thought she was divorced. We didn't know. We're like, where's Keira's dad? So it was very moving, and it was something that Robert, in his infinite wisdom, had always said, if anything ever happens to me, ... And it was just kind of something, I think maybe because of our business, like we just always had this like preparation mindset and planning. And I just remember how moved we both were that night and leaving there. And I had no idea that a year later I'd be burying my husband. Mm. I met Robert. We both lived in Austin. I was 23 and he was 26. Mm-hmm. And so he used to say that he cut me out of the herd early. It was just always funny. So, I mean.
He was a really funny guy.
Yeah. So we grew up together. I mean, we weren't 19 like you guys were when we met, but we were 23 and 26. And he had been in the business like 5 years, and I was working in the mortgage business. And it was such a like love story. It was like from day one, from our first date forward, we saw each other every day. He was just always laughing. I can still hear his laugh. In fact, that's one thing I wish that I had taken more videos and less pictures over time. Like, I wish I could hear his voice more.
Did you save his voicemail? Like, do you have?
I still have his phone.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like have.
You have his phone. You have his car.
I drove his car here.
Are you wearing his shoes today? No.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about shoes.
That's another story, too. I wore his wedding ring for a long time until I thought I lost it. And then I was like, I got to buy a different ring to put on that finger to replace it. So, because I thought I had lost his wedding ring, which it was funny when we got it, I said, there's no way you're going to keep up with that. You take it off when you go to the gym, you take it off when you go to the golf course. There's no way you're going to keep that ring more than a year. It was a bet. Well, the day he died, we took it off of him.
Oh.
And we had been married. He died just the month or a couple of weeks before our 16th wedding anniversary. I remember we knew each other through some mutual friends, and then he was part of this thing called the Austin Men's Foundation and Trust. They used to do these charity balls, and he was part of this organization, and I worked for a guy who was part of it too. And so we got introduced through some mutual friends. I'll just kind of make it a shorter story. But we ran into each other at a pre-party, and I had gone into his office the week before. And I had asked my friend, I was like, I need to open up an investment account. And he's like, oh, you should call Robert. And I was like, really? Should I? Because they had said I should date him, but we were both dating other people when we had first met. And even though we had both kind of said something about the other one to our friends. So like a year later, he's like, you should definitely call Robert. So I did, and I met with him. And then like the next week, I ran into him at this pre-party, and we were at Cedar Street.
Coincidences.
No.
Wait, were you at the pre-party with
Your current boyfriend?
No.
So you had split up. So you were footloose and fancy free.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
What about him?
Well,
We were both kind of seeing someone, but not like seriously.
Oh, okay.
But we had both split up with the person that we had been seriously dating before. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
He had broken up with Ashley, and John. Yeah. No. Okay. So that was over. But when we ran into each other at this pre-party, it was like, I'll just say we ran into each other probably like 8:00. I saw some friends. I was sitting around at one of the tables inside at Cedar Street, and I had like 4 guys around that I was talking to because I knew all the guys in this foundation because I had been around for a couple of years helping with it. And he came up to me, and he goes, Dana, you really have to come into my office more often. And I was like, what? And he goes, when you left, I was the most popular guy in there. He's like, everybody was coming up to my desk asking who you were and what you did. And it was just really sweet. And let's just say from that night on, we were never apart. It seemed like we went to Polyesters and went dancing. You guys remember that place?
Polyesters.
We went to Fado. We went to some other club. I don't know. Anyway, we ended up having a great time. And I think 3:00 in the morning, we ended up at Katz's on West 6th.
And by the way, it did close.
It did close.
The whole slogan was Katz's never closes. It closed.
Yeah. So, anyway, we fell in love, and it was an amazing love story. We were together for 6 years before we got married. We dated for 3, we were engaged for 3, and then we were married for 16. After we got married, Robert was like, if I had known how much I love being married to you, I'd have done it a lot sooner.
Oh,
I remember he told me that.
he's a sweet talker.
Yeah.
So
That's
loving.
sweet.
Yeah.
He really was. And we did wait 11 years to have children. Our daughters, Vivian and Ava, are 12 and 13. They're in 6th and 7th grade now. When he passed, they were 9 and 11. And I look back and I think, wow, if we had had them sooner, he could have watched them grow up. But we waited 11 years. We waited a long time. We wanted to make sure that before we had kids, we could provide everything that they could ever possibly need. We could educate.
2 financial planners getting
Yeah, I can see how that would. Yeah, you've got your spreadsheets
They've
out.
got it
You're
all figured out now.
Got 2
Figure that out.
creative people in my house. We're like, whatever.
No, I
works.
married a financial guy, so there were lots of spreadsheets and budget talks. But and we waited a while to have kids because he wasn't ready.
to look at the budget.
Right, exactly. It was really, I think, a fear of making sure he could provide.
Yeah.
But
And that was definitely Robert's. He was a family steward, like through and through.
well, and I think what you said about we could have gotten married sooner, or we could have had children sooner. You tend to play that game a little bit when your loved one dies, and you're like, oh, did we waste time? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I take more video? Why didn't we have kids? But the truth is, everything, you gained a lot being together for 11 years without kids. You got to fully be that person for each other and no
Immersed
other
in the couple- in
distractions.
just the
Yeah.
couple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which with Frank, we had kids pretty quickly. So yeah, we didn't have that kind of as much couple time.
Yeah, kids do change things a little bit.
Yeah. Well, we did have amazing couple time, and we had been thinking that I would join his practice and become an advisor as well, or in some other capacity in the practice after the girls were in school full time. That was kind of our thought. And then there was an opportunity for me to go in and get licensed, and we're like, okay, well, let's do it. So I did, and I joined like the licensing program at his firm. And I'm really glad I did. It's been 10 years now. And I helped, I had been helping with the practice in a not so professional capacity, just as a spouse and as someone, because we did a lot of socializing with clients. It wasn't all just meeting and going over their financial plans. Like we went to the funerals, of our clients, and we went to the weddings of their kids and their weddings, and we were very involved. And it was one thing that we always said, if something happens to your spouse or something happens big to you, we want to be your first call. So, I had been through that, and I had watched other women bury their husbands.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I didn't realize until he died how I thought I got it, and I didn't. I just didn't. Nobody can. And I thought that I was doing the right things to support them. And I hope that I did. But now I look back and I'm like, I wish I could have done more,
We all feel that way at times. And you were saying that even right when Robert was kind of starting to feel unwell, you were at a client's daughter's wedding, I think, or you were going to a wedding and he wasn't feeling up for it.
Yeah. So, fast forward, we have 2 little girls. They're in school. I'm working. We're building and growing our practice. And Robert started not feeling well right after we met you, not long, a month or 2. And we kind of didn't know what it was. He had some tingling in his fingers. And then we had a trip to New York for a Veterans Day weekend. We went to New York. We had some meetings in our executive offices with kind of our quantum team. And when we landed in New York, he was like, I just don't feel good. I feel like I have like a virus or something. I don't know what's going on. And he really didn't feel that great in New York. And I was like, okay, well, maybe it's, the air. We get home. He's like, I still don't feel that great. And we had a client's wedding. It was actually their son and now daughter-in-law were getting married, and it was on our wedding anniversary.
Oh.
And it was our 15th wedding anniversary. And I'm like, well, that'll be fun. Robert loved weddings. Like, ask any of our friends, he would tie one on, dance. He'd always have fun.
He was kind of a big personality.
It's kind of a joke. Like, he
Super
didn't really
extroverted.
drink a lot, but like, I felt like at weddings, he'd be like, I was like, what are you doing?
Celebrating life party.
It's almost a joke with some friends. So, but that night he was like, yeah, I just don't really feel good. I need to go home. I can't do it. And so we went to the wedding. We stayed for a little bit. And you talk about coincidences. We actually sat at a table that night with a gentleman that is a friend of our client, and he's a researcher at Harvard University at the McLean College of Medicine, and he's working on it's a chemo delivery system for brain tumors.
Oh my gosh.
So
That's
Robert's
crazy.
Robert's brain is actually is part of the prototype for it. And so he's developed this model that has like his cranium, and it shows like a 3D image of Robert's tumor. It's really cool.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. Amazing.
That's incredible. Okay, so you're at the wedding.
we were at the table with that man.
Yes, that's
Insane.
crazy.
And he's saying, I'm not going to be the life of the party at this wedding. I don't feel great. And we need to
I want to go home.
get home. Yeah.
And we did. And the next day, I had orchestrated this huge client event out at Salt Lick, and invited all of our clients. And he really didn't feel good that day. And he got up just in time to come to the party, like at 11. And when it was over at 3, he's like, I got to go home. I got to go home.
And at this point, there's no real red flags coming at you. You're just like, oh, he's got a virus or the flu or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's November.
These days you'd be testing for COVID.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that was like November 16th was the anniversary. November 17th was the client event. And then I was supposed to host Thanksgiving for my family. And and his parents, of course. And I told them all, I was like, guys, something's up with Robert. I don't know. He's sick. I need to cancel. And my sister ended up hosting. So the girls and I went up to Dallas and left Robert home. But he quickly got very sick after that. And I remember Christmas Eve, I was trying to get him to go to the doctor again. Of course, we had been going to the GP and he's like, oh, it's viral. There's nothing wrong in your blood work. We had done all kinds of stuff. And he's like, but, you're just going to have to get through this. You'll be okay. And
that was the GP. You hadn't seen any specialists.
I hadn't seen
It
any
was going on
specialists.
for a couple months.
Well, it was November. It was like basically mid-November till almost Christmas, so almost 6 weeks.
Okay.
And he's like, I'm not going to the doctor this week again. I'm not going to the hospital this week. It's the C team. He's like, I'm not doing it.
It is.
It was
in the
because
weekend,
it was the holidays.
C team.
Uh-huh. And so he's like,
That's funny. I can hear him saying that for some reason.
yeah, so he would not go. So Christmas Eve, I don't remember why he was drinking passion tea, I told you, because I handed him the mug and he tried to grip it with his left hand and his hand shook. And he burned his hand with the tea and it got like all over the rug and his mom like jumped in and was like with a towel. And I remember like taking it from him and I walked in the kitchen. I was like, oh my God, something is really wrong.
And at this point, they hadn't looked at his brain or anything.
No.
They're just doing blood work and saying it's viral.
And there's no fever and there's really, they can't figure out.
He just doesn't feel good. But he's shaking at this point. He's having some trouble controlling his hand. And I'm like, ugh. And I'm thinking it's MS, it's Parkinson's, it's some neurological thing. And I was like, okay, we can get through this. I'm going to get him to the doctor. And, he kept struggling through. And then I guess it was the day before New Year's finally, I was like, Robert, we got to go. We got to go. And I took him to the heart hospital and we walked in. The nurse was like, you have a blood clot. And then they're like, you have 2 blood clots. He had blood clots on both lungs. And so, me, I get out my phone. You Google that one.
Oh, no.
Tumors are procoagulant. Oh. And they're like, oh, it's probably just because you haven't been able to work out for 6 weeks. And, he was very, very active. Robert worked out he worked out pretty much 5 days a week and played golf like 2 or 3 days a week. So he was super active, very healthy. I eat way worse than he ever thought about eating. So they don't do any kind of CT, but they figure out it's a blood clot. So we go home, blood thinners, all this.
So still nothing with the brain. They did
Still nothing
something
with
in
the
the
brain.
lungs. Okay.
So then,
Because
what
what
did
would the lungs be about the shaking? I mean, like,
well,
what would the lungs
Fatigue.
have to do with that?
So, so New Year's Eve, I went to our friend Natalie and Tom's house around the corner, and we shot fireworks with the girls. Robert didn't feel like doing anything, and he stayed home. And I got home right at midnight. I think we celebrated over there at 11, and I went to sleep. And he woke me up at 6:30 in the morning. He said, I've been up all night. And he said, I figured out a plan. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this for my exercise. And we're going to go to the Bahamas like we planned at spring break because we had we had already paid for our trip and all that we were going to go over spring break and with some friends that have a place down there. And he's like, I'm going to be feeling better. I'm going to have this all nipped in the bud so that I can go on this trip and we can go fishing. And, it was this plan. And it was, but first, I have to lay down. I have the worst headache I've ever had in my life. And I said, oh, no, you don't lay down. Get up, put on your pants. And I think I threw on pajamas. Or
You said you were in your pajamas.
I think
maybe.
I was I grabbed a sweatshirt. It was January 1st. It was chilly. And I was like, put on your clothes. We're going. I said, they told me that if you had a headache, I had to come back.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, because you could have a blood clot in your brain, get in the car now. I didn't even call EMS. I was like, just get in the car. And my kids
and he
are
just
asleep.
did what you told him to do.
Yeah. And my kids are asleep upstairs. And so I called our friend I called Natalie and Tom and I was like, you guys come over. Bob and Linda can't be here. My in-laws couldn't have been there for like 45 minutes or an hour at least. And I was like, I can't wait. And so they live in the neighborhood and they came over and stayed until my in-laws got there. And we went back to the heart hospital and they said, okay, well, we need to do a CT real fast on your head to see if there's a blood clot. I'm like, oh, okay. And he comes back in.
Now we're getting down to it.
Yeah. And the doctor comes in and he says, okay, he says, well, the CT shows you do have a mass on your brain. I said, you mean like a blood clot? He goes, no, like a tumor. And just.
And he's saying that in front of the two of you.
Yeah, to both of us.
And
it's
does
just
it compute right away?
No.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. I was like, okay. Well, it computed, but it was like.
You're like, okay,
Shock.
so what do we do when there's a mass? Yeah, you just go into.
So then I'm like,
yeah,
okay, what do we do?
Fix it.
So he said, we need to transfer you to St. David's immediately. You need to have an MRI. And my first thing is, wait, is that the right place?
Right, sure.
Shouldn't we be at MD Anderson? Shouldn't we be, at Sloan Kettering? Where should we be? I just jump into, no, we're going to get him the best care.
Right.
And so my first call, before I call any family or anything, is a friend of mine who works in the healthcare space. And I said, where should I be taking him? Robert has a brain tumor. Where should I go? They want me to go to St. David's. And she said, I'm going to make a call. Hold on. I'll call you right back. But I think it's St. David's. I think they have the best neuro, specialty. They have a neuro ICU. They're the only one in Austin. So I was like, okay. And this was pre-COVID, but barely. Let me just say, barely.
Because it's January.
This is January 1st of 2020.
2020.
Yeah,
Wow.
It all shuts down in March.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yeah. So we spend the night in the hospital. The neurosurgeon comes in and tells us that they believe that this mass that's in his left cerebellum is I can't remember what it's even called now, some kind of basically mass that he's had since he was a child, and it's benign.
Oh, man.
So we check out of the hospital the next day, believing that he has a benign tumor and that that's not the cause of the
Clotting.
the lung clots.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he's still not feeling great because of the clots, but they believe that the tumor is benign because of the location of it and the shape and the way that it looks at that moment. And let's make note that Robert was extremely claustrophobic. So just getting an MRI took like an ungodly amount of
Valium.
Xanax. I mean, they had to
Yeah.
they
Drank.
said- they were like, he needed what an elephant needs to be knocked out. And he was still super anxious about it. So,
So when you get that news that it's benign, does that bring the level of anxiety down?
yeah.
And then you don't feel like,
Yeah.
you feel like, okay, we've got some time here.
Yeah.
You weren't as concerned about the blood clots that were in the lungs or whatever. That
we can heal those. Let's focus on healing the blood clots. We go home. He tries to do a little bit of work for that month that we're home. By the end of the month, so that's January 1st, by January 25th, we had various appointments. We had seen a hematologist who went through a history. We just saw all kinds of doctors looking for tumors, right? We're like, what's
they're
causing
not
it?
saying, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. I'm
No.
trying to wrap my head around, there's a tumor in the brain and they say
know.
it's benign, but it's impacting every part of him. But they're saying that that's not what's impacting him. All these health issues have nothing to do with that tumor. It's been there his whole life. Yeah. So no one's trying to remove it or treat it in any way.
They tell us, wait 6 weeks. We're going to do another scan and see if it's changed. Well, we didn't make it 6 weeks because anybody who knows, Robert died of a glioblastoma. Glioblastomas are very fast moving, and they grow just incredibly fast.
His was in a very unusual space.
It was, which is why they believed that it was benign, because only 0.7% of glioblastomas are in the left cerebellum.
Wow.
I actually talked to a surgeon at Houston Methodist who told me, he said, well, I want to see the biopsy after we removed the tumor. He said, I want to see it and I want to redo the biopsy. He said, I just don't believe it. He said, I do 300 surgeries a year. He said, I've never seen one in the left cerebellum. I've never seen a glioblastoma in the left cerebellum.
So back at this point, you're trying to wait the 6 weeks on January 20th.
I think it was the 25th. So we didn't make it the 6 weeks. I called the hospital and I got him in for an MRI on a Monday, and he just got worse and worse that weekend. And I said, okay,
Is he vomiting and stuff, or just lethargic? And
so it turns out he had hydrocephalus, which is like fluid on the brain. And what was happening was the tumor was pushing on something which was not allowing the fluid to drain off of his brain. So he developed hydrocephalus, which is like fluid, and he couldn't really move a lot. Like he was really dizzy and like trying to stand up. Like I had gotten a walker for him and a cane like that week before, and like all the lights had to be off. Nobody could move. He didn't want to eat. He didn't want to talk to anybody. And
just miserable.
And that Sunday morning, I was like, I'm going to have to take him back to the ER. Like I can't wait till tomorrow. And I remembered all of a sudden, my daughters ride horses. And I remembered all of a sudden that one of my daughters had been riding with a young woman. I was like, oh, her dad's a neurosurgeon. I forgot. I'm going to call him, because I had called another friend of mine who was a neurosurgeon and I didn't get him. I think he was out of town. We actually both know Dr. Stokes.
Oh, yeah.
But I called James Waldron, who my daughter rode with his daughter. I actually called his wife and I was like, I need to talk to your husband. And I said, what should I do? Should I wait, till tomorrow? Like I was so concerned. I was like, should I wait till tomorrow? He's like, no, you get him to the ER right now. He has hydrocephalus. He told me, he said, you need to get him there right now. So we went back to St. David's and redid the scan. By this point, his blood pressure was fluctuating just drastically. He was very, very touch and go, very, very sick.
So you get him to the hospital and they take him.
EMS took him.
Okay.
I couldn't even get him up.
Yeah. And then he gets whisked away and they're telling you he's very, very sick and may not make it?
No.
Or they're just saying he's very sick?
No, I'm with him the whole time.
Okay.
So he was hospitalized for 8 weeks and I really barely left his side. So, no, I was with him and we redid it and they said, we need to go in and do a shunt. We need to go in and relieve the pressure. So either that night or the next morning, they went in and did a surgery to reduce the pressure. And to let that fluid drain. They do like a shunt thing, I think is what it's called. So lots of moving parts here. He's in the hospital. They tell us that, at some point we need to go in and remove the tumor, but we don't know why it's growing so quickly. But the only way, if you're going to do a biopsy of the tumor, it's almost as invasive as just going in and removing the tumor. So we set up a date to remove the tumor, but we wanted him to get a little bit better and a little bit stronger first.
And they're still thinking it's benign and not cancerous, even though it's growing.
Well, we don't really know that it's...
They don't have a biopsy.
Sure,
Right.
sure.
And it's an unusual presentation.
Spot, so they're not thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
Who's with the girls? Are your in-laws with the girls? Were your parent? Who's staying with the girls? And what are they being told?
So at this point, they know their daddy's really sick. And I can't remember exactly. I remember her face, and I remember telling Vivi one night when I came home that Daddy had a brain tumor, and that was the second hospital stay. I very vividly remember, and she said, "Get it out, make them get it out." She was actually still 10. So fast forward, he has multiple surgeries because we had to do like a filter because of the blood clots, because he had to be off of, in order to have surgery, he had to be off of the
blood thinners.
I mean, there was so many moving parts. And this whole time he's in the ICU.
And he's talking and stuff, or is he?
Yeah. Okay. But he's in a lot of pain, and he's very uncomfortable. He's having trouble focusing and moving his hands, and I mean, there's a lot.
Is he making decisions for himself, or have you taken over at this point?
We're still discussing everything, but we're still discussing everything at that point. But he's very, very lethargic, and
So the girls didn't
See him?
Didn't see him for a while.
They did come up and see him at the hospital.
Oh, okay.
And at this point, too, we've decided that we're not ready to tell our clients yet what's going on. So if you can imagine,
You're trying to keep everything going at work.
yeah, like because we don't know at this point, what to tell them.
Right.
So I start trying to come up with a strategy of how I'm going to handle our business as well. And I work with our executive leadership team and my team and the people that work with us directly. And they did a fabulous job. And then the tumor was removed as much as possible. And what's really crazy is we ended up being in the same surgery suite, ward, whatever, waiting room. And a friend of mine who had dinner with us that
they were
night
also,
at
their
Clark's.
daughter was also friends with ours at the school. And we're at the Clark's dinner, and they live down the street from you.
And she had a double mastectomy scheduled for breast cancer. And they ended up being in the hospital and in surgery on the exact same day.
Wow.
Open to
So
this
so you had a support there. These people.
It was crazy.
That's amazing.
Well, she had this diagnosis sort of in the midst of all this, right?
Yeah,
And hers was also fairly aggressive to the point where they scheduled her surgery kind of ASAP.
Quickly.
Yeah.
And then they ended up being on the same day, the surgeries.
Yep. Ended up being the same day, same place.
Wow.
But, very different outcome. But she's doing great. I mean, I'm so happy that she is.
That's great.
So the next day was when they came back, and I knew when Dr. Bodman called me and said, I'll be in at 8 a.m. We have the biopsy results. And they had told me it would be maybe a week even, but they had already told us it looked really bad. We don't know, but it looked really bad.
And they didn't get all of it.
Well, that they can't.
They couldn't because it's wrapped around things that are important.
Right. So when she called me and said I'll be in at 8 a.m, I was like, oh, that was too fast. I just got this like sick feeling. And I remember there were 2 nights that were really, really long. And the first one was that January 1st, that night that we stayed in the hospital waiting to find out what type of tumor it was after the first MRI. And then the next one was that night when she called and said, I'll be there at 8 a.m. And she came in. I'll never forget what room we were in, where we were sitting. I'm very visual in my memories. So I'll never forget her coming in and telling us. And, one of the things that I think, I feel like my life was just a series of all these traumas. I was having to tell my daughters that, he has a brain tumor, and then having to go back and refresh that with, and he's going to die because this is the most aggressive tumor. And I mean, there's
Is that
no
what
cure.
you were told when the doctor came in at 8 a.m.? What did she say?
Thanks to the Google.
Google.
Yeah, I already knew. Like when she said glioblastoma, GBM, I was like, oh, glioblastoma multiform. And then after that, we had to wait for the genetics just to try to find out how to best treat it. But, really, for glioblastomas, the treatment and the prognosis has not moved more than like a month or two in 30 plus years.
Crazy.
There's just nothing that they can do. And one of the struggles, from what I understand, and I'm not a scientist, is that they have trouble getting enough chemo past the blood-brain barrier to make a difference. So even though he did not want to do it, Robert did do radiation and chemo, because we thought that it might buy him a little time, and he wanted that. And he did it for me. And I look back and I'm glad he did, because I think the not knowing of could it have been cured, would have been too terrible. But I'll tell you, watching him suffer and go from the strong, able-bodied man that he was to what physically his body deteriorated to was so hard. That was,
and so
looking
what
back,
was
that
the time
very
frame
painful.
from the time that you found out until the time he died?
So we found out like February 25th. And I did take him to Indy Anderson as soon as we got out of the hospital because I was hoping that he could qualify for like a moonshot program. And he ended up getting really sick and ended up being hospitalized at MD Anderson and was in palliative care when COVID hit.